Okay, it says that we're live.
Okay, so my name is Leah Mon.
I'm Elizabeth Bischoff.
And I'm Brittany Grubb.
All right.
Awesome.
Who should go first with the first question?
I'll start.
Really, I think we can ask the question and then kind of all give our feedback into it. But that's just me.
You said what now?
Wait, what was that?
Maybe we just read the question and then we all kind of just share what we wrote.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I'll read the question since I voted to go first.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so the first question is, what doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate? Why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in your heart, to be passionate and persistent? So, I said that the doctrine that was in Wilbur's heart was to advocate against of ending the slave trade, and he was advocating for just how inhumane the way that the African men and women and children were being treated, and he wanted to end that. And he wanted to also make a difference and change in the world for the better. And the first step was the slave trade, and then from then on out until the end of the movie, I mean, he was advocating the whole entire movie. So why I think we need to be passionate and persistent about advocating for the family is because it's something that is it's something that needs a lot of support. So I'm kind of looking at my paper. And the family unit it's central to our Heavenly Father's plan, and by having so many people in support of the family and emphasizing its importance and stuff like that, then we're kind of also advocating for our Heavenly Father. So we're like we're the voice for Him. So that's kind of what I wrote. Have thoughts on.
Right. I talked a lot about how that the doctrine was that Wilbur believed that all men were equal under God, and that he believed in basic human rights.
Yeah.
And I talked about the difference a little bit between just a regular belief and I support this idea versus that I know that this is the truth. So when you have a doctrine in your heart, and so like when we advocate for children and families, we know the truth about families. We know that they are eternal and that our salvation really comes down to families. And that's a lot different than saying, well, I just support the idea of a family, or I just support parents. It's a lot stronger, and so I think it's important to have a doctrine in your heart because it gives you purpose, and it gives you that fire for to continue going even when it's not popular. I feel like if it's not a doctrine or something that's really deeply rooted in who you are and in your spirit and heart, then it's just kind of a fad, and when it stops being popular or other issues come up, then you tend to let it go and put it on the back burner. And Wilbur never did that, even when everything else in his life was going on, and even when the war broke out. So.
Right.
Alrighty. I said that he had a lot of doctrines in his heart. He understood the sanctity of life. He understood that he was created equal. He understood that man is not property to man. He understood that people should not be abused, used, and treated cruelly. He also understood that not only did he have to have the passion and the voice, but it was also a necessity for him to do something about it. So that was a big doctrine, as acting. One of the main reasons the doctrine of the family is important is because it's patterned after the design Heavenly Father has intended for us, and that's how we're supposed to pattern our lives. I think that He put us in families because of our unconditional love and support that we can offer one another. And I think it's through these relationships that we learn and harness some of our most divine attributes. So there is a reason why we need to be protecting them. I think it's also a crucial part of our society. Each new law we pass or policy we accept that removes the protection of the traditional family tarnishes our society and really kind of is one step backward. children are not taught the same values they once were, and they're the people that are going to lead, the world later on. So it's kind of interesting. It's important to be passionate about the family doctrines because our passion, beliefs, and testimonies are the things that are going to reach through the heart and hearts of the nation. Love, happiness, joy, and peace, they're catching, and as people see this in our examples and the way we live our lives and hold ourselves and take care of our families, they're going to want to feel that too, especially as the world gets harder. It's also important to be persistent because things don't change easily, and often it takes many, many attempts. And I think that we have to be willing to rise and fall many times. This is where Satan really gets to us because it's so discouraging to fail time and time again that it's easy to be like, you know what, I'm done. And Wilbur did the same thing. He went home for a long time and was getting taken care of by his cousin and wasn't really in the fight until his future wife really put him back into that. And I think it's because it's very taxing on a body and a soul. And we must continue forward because we know what we're teaching is right, and it's essential that we protect whatever our cause may be. There really is no other way than just to continue moving forward. So that's why I think we have to be persistent.
Right, yeah, I think it comes down to having something to hang on to, kind of like clinging to the rod. That's something that when everything else is pulling you away, that you deeply know in your heart what's the right thing to do. So, definitely.
Those are great. I had a lot of those in my paper as well. I just didn't say them because I figured you guys probably would too. So that was great.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, so the second question is how did Wilbur employ a theoretical or Bonfim-Brenner approach to become a more effective advocate? Identify at least one thing in each system and be specific. So who would like to go first on this one?
I can go first.
Okay.
So I just said that he employed the approach by working with the community and many other people. He didn't just rely on him and what he did. He found sources that could help him. And then I listed out each system and then an example. And so like in the microsystem, which is like the family and the basic unit, is I talked a lot about his wife, that he needed support from his wife. He needed to know that what he was doing was right and okay. And I also think he relied heavily on the pastor, which goes a little bit into a different system, but I still kind of count that as like family because they seemed really close and he was very religious.
He kind of treated him like his father, it seemed like, so I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, I think so. And I feel like he definitely went to the pastor a lot when he was questioning whether he should really take this on or not. With the meso system, he tried to connect the church and his relationship and friendship with the prime minister. I thought it was really interesting that he had a personal relationship with the prime minister, but was also political. And so he had to figure out how to connect those two things. And he also connected all of these different things. So the church and his friendship with the prime minister and his wife, those things connected him to the government, because that's what the meso system is, I thought, was like how the relationship between things. And then the exosystem, I talked about how he went to law school and he also employed teachings from the church in his upbringing, because those are things that he wasn't necessarily in control of, but he was taught these things from other people, and from the kind of the culture of the times was being really religious, and he saw a discrepancy between, okay, God loves his children and yet we're doing these things, and then the macro system, I said that this came into play a lot when it became seditious for him to advocate against the king. The macro system was like the bigger government, and he had to navigate the culture that relied heavily on the slave trade for economic gain, and he also had to really appeal to the people. And I think a big way he tried to advocate on the macro system level was with the publishing of the books, and by appealing to like the greater audience with like the vote and the signatures. And the chrono system is how like cultural things influence what he's doing, and I think this came into play a lot also when the war began. It changed the tone of society, and it really made it so he couldn't advocate very safely and effectively. So.
Awesome. You basically said everything that I was going to say.
That's all right. Sorry, I guess I should have just like.
Oh, you're good. No, but what I thought was kind of interesting was I kind of want to just kind of touch off of his relationship that he had with the person who became the prime minister, and how they were really good friends, like best friends, before he became the prime minister, and how William, I think that was his name, the guy who became the prime minister, he really encouraged Wilbur to advocate through the government and still be religious at the same time. And I really liked that because I feel like it kind of relates to us as marriage and family. I don't know if you guys are marriage and family studies majors. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. I think you are. But it really pertains to us as that are in this class and advocating for the family, and how we're both religious, but a lot in this class we've had to focus on political stuff, and we've had to advocate on a level that was political where we couldn't incorporate religion. And
Right.
so I thought it was really interesting how they brought that into the movie, and I really appreciated it because I was able to relate to it, you know. Because sometimes when you're advocating from a religious point of view, it's like people just shut down and they don't listen to you. But when you're using both, or when you're just using the political side, I guess you could say, then people do listen to you. And so I liked that the movie really touched on that. And then I also really loved the influence that his eventual wife had in his life, and how she was so enthusiastic about supporting him, and she knew everything that he had done before they even met. And I thought that that was really cool, and how even after they got married, that like Leah said, how she was kind of like the extra spark that like let him, like the flame again for him to advocate. And I think that's also really important when we're advocating, is we need to have like something on the side that really keeps us going to keep advocating, because like Wilbur will get burnt out, and we need something that's continual to keep us going. So
Right.
those were just some things that I kind of noticed. Those are kind of the micro and a little bit the meso system, because of how Wilbur and William connected, and how it was two micro systems in the meso system. So that was something that I noticed. But anyways.
Just my 2 cents on it, because I agree with everything that you've said, and again, I repeat it all, but I think that the interesting thing about it was his really only microsystem relationship before his wife was the future prime minister. That was the basis of it all. And then everything else was in the mesosystem. And even when his rich friend became the prime minister, that relationship changed. You know, I mean, he came back and said, you know, there's going to be a war, and we're going to hold you in. And so I think that really everything he did was based on the relationship between those programs, and or relationship between, you know, family and friends, and the people that he originally got connected with, the secondary system, you know, the people that showed up at his house and really kind of got him into the cause, weren't family, they weren't friends, they were more of community and peer group, and I think that once he got involved with them, they became more of a family, and so there was really a lot throughout the entire time. There was a lot of going back between the micro and the meso systems. That, you know, they were almost interchangeable, I think.
Right. No, I agree with that very much.
And then I think there was obviously a lot happening on the macro and the chrono system, because of political and government. The whole movie is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, it really was. It was interesting to see how like all the different Brenner systems were incorporated in this movie. Like every single one was in this movie. Like sometimes it's not as obvious, but this movie it was very obvious, everything that was incorporated. But it's interesting how they all intertwined. Like you couldn't just single them out. Like I was having a hard time singling each one out. You know, because like you said with William, he was the initial microsystem, but then he became part of the mesosystem, and then mesosystem became a part of the government, and it was just like this crazy thing. Anyways, okay.
Right.
So should we move on to the next question? Oh
I
yeah.
just wanted to add something. Sorry. With the something that stuck out with me when I was looking for this is the
Uh-oh, we lost Megan.
oh
Oh
we lost Brittany. Dang it. All right,
yeah,
hang on just a second.
Is it Brittany or is it Megan? I can't remember.
I think it's Brittany.
Oh yeah, it's Brittany. Yeah, it's Brittany.
All right, well, hang on a second. I think she's having internet problems because I'm watching her log in and log back out. Like her little picture is like colored and then it's not.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh, good. She's
Okay,
good.
there we
Okay,
go.
we're good. I was just about to send you another invite just in case. Okay,
All right.
what were you saying, Leah? Or
Yeah, I was just saying that one thing that stuck out to me when I was looking for this was the impact of the economy. One moment that I thought was really powerful was when that guy, I don't know who he was, but that guy who stood up in support of abolishing the slave trade said, yes, we should do this, but we should do it slowly. And because of the way it impacts other people. And you know, I don't know, I was kind of torn because obviously I don't believe in the slave trade, like it should be abolished and like as immediately as possible, but at the same time, like he had a point that there are people who rely on that, and although it's wrong that they rely on that, it has more impact than just freeing the slaves. And so it just showed me a lot that as when we advocate in the world that even if we believe that we're dead right, and which, you know, the slave trade or abortion or whatever is, there are people on the other side who it does affect in possibly a negative way. And we have to make sure that we take that into account in how we advocate and our plans for change. Because I think Wilbur may have gotten more of a response if he was willing to take those small steps. So yeah.
that was really good. I totally agree. And I thought about the same thing when he got up. I was frustrated at first, but then I was also torn as well because I was like, oh, but it makes complete sense because something like that takes a while and it affects so many people. Like there's so many other factors that play into something like that. So I'm glad that you brought that up because I kind of forgot that I had that thought until you brought it up when I was watching the movie. And I didn't write it down, but yeah. Okay, so the third question is, how did Wilbur and his fellow advocates do and share their research? What evidence did they provide to persuade those opposing or on the fence? So, Brittany, if you want to go first, you could go first since Leah and I have gone first.
Absolutely. Really, I think the main place that they got their research was through real-life examples. They found people who had been through it. They found people who had been involved in the slave trade, who were slaves in the slave trade. You know, they had the black man tell them of what the experiences were like. He eventually wrote a novel about it. They showed the real-life chains that were used. They made the cause really personal to them so they could make it personal to others. Some men traveled so they could have the real-world example. They used the boat ride as a place to advocate. And I think that really asking the people to remove their handkerchiefs from their faces so they could smell it was really like a pivotal moment in persuasion, because how could you not remember that experience?
Right.
Another place we really did find the research was through his preacher friend, who is going to be, you know, who used to be the slave tradesman, because in the end, that book is really what like pushed it forward. But I think that everything came from real life examples. That was where everything.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said, and I think, I don't know if you guys know like logos, pathos, and ethos, that are like those different forms of, I can't remember what it is right now. I'm having a brain blank, but I thought that it was really interesting because they applied all three of those like techniques in their research and approach to people, and for pathos, it's more like sympathy and being like kind, or not kind, sorry, it's more like creating emotion is what it is. And by having those different interactive things, like taking them on the boat ride and having them know, smell the smell, like smell this, and then the stories and things, that really affects people because it gets right to the heart and you can't forget it. And so I think that was where they were really effective.
And I
And
think I think it humanizes them. It humanizes the slaves and it humanizes the audience. And I don't know, I think about today with, politicians and how politicians have this, I don't know, stereotype. But, they have that stereotype because they forget to do these things. They forget to have a human experience and a human moment. And by bringing to the audience, and especially to a political audience who has power to make these things, to advocate in front of them, they don't, I think, especially in today's world, they don't get that human experience very often. And so by making an impact, or by bringing that human experience to them, it forces them to really take on the issue and realize that the policies that they're making are either helping or destroying lives, and that provides them an opportunity to really change. Otherwise, then they're just signing papers and they don't really truly comprehend the consequences of what they're doing. So,
I agree.
yeah.
okay, did we kind of finished that question then? Okay, so question 4. How does the film portray the importance of working together as a group? What has family advocacy group work taught you? So, I'll kind of take this one. So, working together, it was interesting because we kind of talked about this in my other group that I've been in all semester. And we talked about how family advocacy work is easier when there's strength in numbers. And we kind of have noticed throughout the semester that it's really been based on being in a group of people, because the more people you have, the more effective you're going to be, and the more likely you're going to get listened to. And it's also because you have the support of other people, and you're able to kind of bounce ideas off each other, and you're able to go forward with those ideas. So I think that's why advocacy in groups is better, because you have support of other people that believe in the same thing as you, and it fuels you. Like, you have to have that thing on the side. If you're doing it alone, then it's hard. So.
Right. Well, and I don't totally agree that, Wilbur couldn't have done any of this without other people. He really played a lot off of his resources, and he knew how to use them. But the key that really stuck out to me was the importance of, sorry, I'm getting a little feedback, was the importance of mitigating the group. So there was a moment where one of his really close members talked about revolution, and he was angry, understandably, and he said, we can start this revolution and overthrow the king and all these things. And Wilbur was like, do not talk about that in front of me. We are not doing that. That is not our. And I've experienced that in my own life. My mom has started a advocacy group, and she had to ask a board member to step down because she was alienating the people we were trying to work with. She had good ideas. She was well intentioned, but she was way too over the top, to where the audience we were trying to get to didn't want to listen to us anymore. And so group work is extremely important, but it's also important to know how to use your resources, and I believe to have a leader, like Wilbur was the leader of that group, and to be able to draw lines where they need to be drawn as far as how to work with different personalities.
I think that I'm going to take a different tactic, because I agreed with both what you said, but I want to just some of the other ideas I had. Going back to the book we read about the conference, I think that's another perfect example of how vital group work is. every member is a key player, right down to the person making copies or typing documents. Like, they were all necessary, and most of them were up until wee hours of the night trying to do this cause. And in order to stay pace with the opposition, it's necessary to keep moving at a steady pace constantly, because they're always, it seems, one step ahead of us. Usually because when you're advocating, you're on the less popular side. On a religious aspect, we advocate for new members through the work of a group. Typically it's only 2 missionaries, but sometimes they're larger, and you've got districts or zone leaders and districts and all that stuff. And I think that the missionaries are not asked to do it alone, and they uplift each other, and they share burdens, and they carry the load when one can't do it alone. And I think that yes, although things can be done with one person and change can be made because we do have that power and we have that voice, there's just something in having someone else have your back, no matter how great or small, no matter how many people are helping you, that can go a long way.
Right. I totally agree with that.
I'm really glad that you said that, because that's really true. When you have someone that has your back, then it makes things a lot better, and you really can go a lot farther. So thanks for sharing that. Let's see. Number 5 says, what parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni and FAML460? What is a Christian and professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? How can you be effective and Christ-like against such loud and often degrading voices? So.
Oh, I'll go ahead and go. Is it my turn to go first?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So I talked about how Captain Moroni really defended the truth, and he was a powerful speaker. And he was able to rally a lot of support, just like Wilbur was. That he used the gift that the Lord gave him, and Wilbur used the gift that the Lord gave him to be able to speak, and to speak in a way that people can understand, and not just understand, but to feel. And I think there are people who aren't as articulate as that, or maybe don't have that gift, and it's really important that if we have a gift as powerful as Wilbur's and Captain Moroni's, that we use it to be persuasive for the truth and for the right things. And it can go either way, because Satan makes things sound very good, but they're not. He's a good speaker. So I just talked about that, how both of them were able to really rally a lot of support through their talents. And he was able to defend those who could not defend themselves. Captain Moroni was also not afraid to play hard and to take on the big guys, and Wilbur wasn't afraid to take on the Prime Minister and the King even. He was going against what the King wanted. And anyway, for the other questions, I said a Christian and a family advocate are essentially the same thing. They believe in the same principles, and they defend the truth. I don't really think you can separate them, because when you have the gospel in your life and you're a Christian, you are called and you have a duty to defend that truth that you now know. And I'm a convert to the church, and so I remember, kind of vaguely, honestly, but I do remember when I was getting taught and we had set a baptism date, we talked about the responsibility that comes with that. And how, I have a responsibility now, knowing the truth and understanding the true knowledge of the Lord, to share that and to stand up for it. So you can't really separate the two. They're essentially the same thing. And then I said Wilbur was first torn about pursuing God's work and pursuing advocacy, but he realized that he needed to be both, and that he could be both. And he exemplified it by relying on the Lord and following his promptings, and he never gave up and never doubted that he was doing the right thing. And you can be effective by following the Spirit and the Lord and not giving in to the degrading voices. And I also think that as a Christian, that really helps you to be an advocate, because you know who you are, and you know that the truth that you are talking about is the truth, and that defines you. And so those voices who are saying you're wrong, or you don't know who you are, or whatever, they don't have any impact, because you know the truth, and that is the bottom line. That cannot be disputed. So just my thoughts on that.
Going last is making it hard, because I'm running out of things to say. You guys are hitting them on the head. I think the biggest things is that Captain Moroni and Wilbur both started with prayer. It shows a scene where Wilbur's out there praying and meditating, and I think that's huge. They both sought to have God on their side before they did their work, not after. So they were trying to be uplifted during the process. I think that they both wore their messages on their chest as well, because Wilbur became known as an abolitionist, and people recognized him as King Wilberforce, who would sail across the ocean to help them and save them, and so I think that was title of liberty, so to speak. I agree with everything on the Christian and professional family advocate, so I'm going to skip that one. I think that one of the biggest things about being Christ-like in opposition is that showing love and compassion shows that you have a true concern for the world and the cause you're standing for. And it makes it easier for people to see your reason and join your side because they want to. People aren't going to be compelled to join you if you hate and if you're negative. I mean, fighting dirty doesn't compel people to join your side. It makes it worse. In fact, it actually probably strengthens the other side because they see you as a jerk. So
Right.
that goes a long way. Is it hard to do a lot of the times, especially when you're getting disrespect? I think absolutely, but I think that if we remember what it is we're fighting for and who we're fighting for, that can really be a driving force. For instance, if we're fighting for our children, will our children be proud of what we say and how we fight for them, or will they be ashamed that we had to go to that length? And I think that's really kind of a way to measure whether or not we're doing what Heavenly Father would have us do.
Totally agree.
Those were really good, and you guys said everything I was going to say. It's really hard for me to even say anything, but I do want to agree on what Brittany said, how they opened their advocacy with prayer. I thought that was really cool, and I liked that the movie covered that because, I don't know, I feel like some movies don't really do that anymore. And I thought it was just really cool that he was such a religious person. I love that it was a true story, too. And it just made me feel good inside that, I mean, I know that there are lots of good people in this world, but it makes you just feel good that someone who fought for something so strongly was a Christian and was so just passionate about it, and he trusted in the Lord to help him as well. And I thought that that was really neat. So I won't really go into depth with everything I said because it would be too long, and it's exactly what you guys said. So it's kind of pointless.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
so number 6 says Marcia Barlow spoke on persuasive speaking and writing. Did Wilbur and others exemplify any of Marcia's ideas? How so? I'm not sure if it's Marcia or Marcia, but I think it's Marcia. I don't know.
I don't know.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, I will go for this one. So I think Wilbur was an amazing storyteller. Like, he had power, and it's because of what he really drew on the pathos ethos. His picture was clear from the beginning. He knew what his purpose was. He knew what he wanted to accomplish, and he started that with every message. It wasn't kind of, walking around the topic or trying to sugarcoat things. He just came out and laid it out for everybody. And just like Marcia discussed, he didn't stop there. He added data. He had stuff to back up his story. The two together were basically an ironclad strategy for them. And, we saw in the movie how people were slowly coming to his side, and they got more and more each time. I think that the opposing side, and I know that didn't ask for this, but I was showing the difference, was that the abolition side really failed to do any perspective. There really was no storytelling. They didn't have data. They were concerned mostly about money, and they were concerned about losing property for those who did have slaves. So even when some of those concerns were refuted by Wilbur and the other men, they were really not willing to back down, and they couldn't explain why. And maybe they did, but the movie didn't show why. It was just very one-sided. It showed one side being very strong and effective in how they were trying to teach others, and the other side was just kind of there.
Right. One thing that hit me, well, two things, is that Wilbur used very, very concrete examples. I mean, he went and he told a story, and he told these things. But honestly, I think what made the big step, the turning point, was when he brought in the shackles, when he showed the boats, when he brought in the actual slave. Those very concrete things you cannot dispute. You can't say, well, that study was skewed, or, you're just making this up or whatever. It was right there in front of them, and it was very concrete. And then he also, I was really struck by how long it took him. This wasn't a movie that showed, oh, he just advocated in one like legislative session or whatever they would call it, and it was fixed. It took years, and he had to wait for the parliament to come back every year to say the same thing over and over again until they finally listened. And that reminded me of Marcia's, or Marcia, whatever you say your name, what she talked about with making small steps and being persistent. Because, you know, you can be powerful, but when you're up against an ideology like the slave trade was, you have to go back year after year to say the same thing until they start understanding it. So.
What was really interesting too is how Leah kind of brought up how you have to be persistent on something that's been around for a very long time. Like the slave trade had been around for a long time. And it's not something that's just going to change overnight. And so the fact that they were so persistent and just had so much drive to change it was just incredible to me. And I can see how Wilbur he got discouraged. He's like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I can't do this. Like, this isn't going to happen. There's no way that this is going to change. And so I think it was just really cool to see how, you know, like, and it was interesting in each person that was incorporated in their little small advocacy group, each had a moment of weakness where they're like, I cannot do this anymore. But the rest of the group built them up. So I thought that that was really cool. And that's what kept them going, like the persistency. And one thing that I thought was really neat is how effective he was in his talking. Like that was something that Marcia or Marcia, I don't know how you say her name. I watched that video she did, and I don't know how to say it. But
Yeah.
I thought that it was really interesting how she said that when you're an effective speaker, people are going to listen to you. And if you have a story and facts, you are invincible. I remember her saying that, or like talking about that. And they had their story and facts. It's just they needed more of it. And so you can have your story and facts, but you still have to have more and more and more evidence. And I think that's when the pastor at the very end, when he was writing his account, I think that's what probably really pushed it forward. So, anyways, the next question is question 7. What role did the government, policy, and religious freedom play in the fight of the slave trade? Did you see their political system being pro-family? Why or why not?
Is that your turn to go first?
Is it my turn?
I think
Oh, yeah,
so.
yeah, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just got done talking, so I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I think the government played a role in that 2 different parties were for and against the slave trade. I think that's how the government was really involved in this. And for a really long time, the side for the slave trade, had a much larger influence, and it's because they had more influential people. But then over time, I think what changed it as well is that you had the side that didn't want the slave trade anymore. I think over time, like hearing them out and just like hearing it so many times, I think that people started to actually listen. I don't know, that was just something I kind of thought. And then when it comes to policy, this policy of the slave trade had been around for so long, kind of like what I said just not too long ago. And since it had been around for so long, it was something that people just didn't really care about. It was like something I don't think people were really super informed on, and they were not they weren't educated on the awful things that were going on with the slave trade. And so I felt that the government and the policy that was set on the slave trade were not pro-family, because they were harming this policy and was harming innocent men, women, and children all around the world, and the families that were the slaves. And so I think it was really not family oriented at all. But from a religious standpoint, let's see, I'm kind of trying religious freedom and how that played in. I thought it was really interesting how, I mean, it's almost like a miracle that there was religious freedom for Wilbur, and how he was able to talk to his pastor freely about something like this, and how he was kind of able to just pray openly to God, and how he was able to even talk to his friend and the prime minister about it, who eventually became the prime minister, about it. And everyone was able to kind of believe in what they wanted in religion. And for Wilbur, I think that really is what helped him and was his foundation, almost. Because religion is based on family, I feel like, most of the time. And I think that that's what really created that base. And so I think that freedom of religion and that whole side was definitely pro-family and creating freedom for these families that could not advocate for themselves. So that was kind of a lot. That's a really beefy question. But
yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I think that the government made all of the difference, and especially the war. And when the war came around, it made it pretty much impossible for him to effectively advocate without, being charged with sedition. And so understanding, I guess, I don't know, I kind of get torn about this because I don't want to say like, oh, don't advocate if it's not like the right time, because you should always advocate for what you believe in, But you also need to be aware of where the government is at and what other things are going on, so you can approach it in a tactful and timely way. Because, coming in the middle of a war, or like right now with like this whole terrorism and everything that's going on, everybody's really concerned about this terrorism, and then saying, oh, we need to like raise minimum wage. Going back to that, it's not going to get any attention because nobody is worried about it right now. And so I think understanding the moments where you can be the most effective and the least effective are really important. So
that's a great point. I think the government's main role was really evident when the slave trade was shut down, because they felt the impact on the economy was a greater concern. And so the moderator, after a majority vote was already put in, the moderator said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and table that and review it later because it's just going to hurt the economy too much. And that came from the structure of their government. So I think that was a huge thing, because they would have been able to abolish the slave trade much sooner had that not happened.
Right.
As far as policy goes, because, sorry, my son is on my lap.
That's okay.
The policies and the way they were written, they were forced to try and cheat the system with the dummy policy of the flag issue on the boats.
Right.
As far as religious freedom, I really don't think that it was a key proponent in the slave trade. It was certainly there. It made its appearances, but really the issues were political, greedy, and really were about humanity and not God. I think that having the ability to believe one way or another was the key element of religious freedom in this case, but the people it didn't feel like they were trying to abolish it because of their religious beliefs, because Wilbur was the only one that really felt religious besides the preacher. I feel like everybody else was just doing it for humanity's sake.
Right.
But I mean, it was definitely there. I just don't think it wasn't a huge proponent so much as government policy were. And then I don't think the political system was pro-family or anti-family. I think it was self-service. And had family benefited the people, then they would have been pro-family. And had family not benefited the people, then they would have been anti-family. And I think that was just whatever was serving them the best and the most at that point is what they were going to be.
That's a really good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a way good point. I hadn't really thought about, I mean, I kind of did, but not. I thought about how even at one point the government was just what's in it for me type of a thing. And it was, you're right, it wasn't really like specifically one way or the other. Um, so yeah, that's an interesting point that you brought that up because I hadn't really thought about that, but maybe like for a split second, then went away.
Right.
So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so question 8. Do you feel that Wilbur used his time on Earth well? How do you see him showing the elements of consecration that Elder Christofferson spoke of?
Um, yeah, I think he gave his whole life to this. He spent his time on Earth very well. Um, he advocated for something that really changed the lives of many, many people and saved the lives of, all of the generations to come. He left a legacy to follow. Um, and, just with historical knowledge, the movie didn't make this connection. Well, maybe it touched on it, but, this set up a lot for the Civil War in America over slavery and for the rest of the world. And so for him to use his time to make an impact like that is huge. And I think it totally follows what Elder Christofferson talked about. He was being a husband and a father at the same time, which is a big deal. Like, that's really difficult to do. And he was sick and he gave his health. He couldn't sleep at night because he would be haunted by the slaves, um and he married late in life, so he sacrificed that too because he was so like into his politics. And I really felt like he was willing to do anything necessary. I do think there were moments when he was like done and he didn't want to do this anymore. And I think we all hit those moments with anything we face in our life. And I think that's when the other people come in, or the Lord sends them, or comes himself and says, look, this is what you got to do. You can do this. And he understood that he had a talent and a power there. Um, and it really came through in the moment when him and his wife, when he was really sick and he was on the floor and they were talking about the baby to try to distract him from the pain. Sorry, it kind of makes me emotional to think about that. But they talked about the son having a voice like his, and that he understood that that was a gift that not very many people had, and he gave everything to that gift and to using it for the right reasons. So that's what I kind of wrote about.
I actually agreed with everything you said, except for I had one thing that I think disagreed. I'm trying to find out on my paper. He did everything he was supposed to do, but the one thing he did not exemplify in a consecrated life, according to Elder Christofferson, was taking care of his body and his health. That was one thing that they listed Elder Christofferson. He sacrificed that. He exercised and he meditated and he really took care of his mind, and he prayed and he tried to do that, but he still gave more than he had to give physically. And I think that although it's really good for us to advocate and it's really good for us to put ourselves out there, there comes a point where we're doing more harm than we're doing good. And if you give more than what you have to give, then what's left? He still had a family he needed to take care of. And so I think he was weak in that. He still tried to be for his family. He was still there. He still leaned on his family. But, he could have also gone the other way and pushed himself to the point of exhaustion or death.
Yeah.
That was the point that I think that he did not. Everything else, he just nailed it out of the park.
Right. No, I agree with that very much.
I'm glad you brought that up, Brittany, because I was kind of thinking about that as well. I was like, he really, there's that scripture, and I think it's Doctrine and Covenants, that says not to run faster than you have strength, and that applies to everything we do. And I have to kind of remind myself of that a lot, and that you can only do so much. And Heavenly Father understands. And so, like, with Wilbur, he did so much, and he lived his life very well. And but when he was really sick, it's like, at that point in time, what I think he probably should have done was taken a longer break and taken better care of his health, gotten better, and then gone back to advocating because he didn't really get better before he went back to advocating. I mean, he just like got out of bed and went to it, and it's like, wait a minute, like stop, you're still very, 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 very sick.
Right.
And so that was something that kind of frustrated me a little bit about the movie. I was like, okay, you need to take care of your body. And when I looked at that question that was based off of Elder Christopherson's talk, or Elder Christopherson's stuff that he said, I was like, yeah, he needed to take better care of himself. So,
right. I guess the reason I didn't talk about that, and I kind of felt like he gave his health, and I kind of looked at it differently. My impression from the movie was that the doctors didn't know what was wrong with him, and that it was just the stress and the being unable to sleep and being kind of haunted about the slave trade. Understandably, it's a disturbing thing what's happening, and so because of that, I kind of felt like, well, advocating and changing that is where he would start feeling better and being able to sleep at night. And I do agree that you have to take care of yourself, and that Wilbur probably could have done better. But I also kind of feel like he was doing everything he could because, this was really a big deal for him, and I don't know how much he could have really controlled about that. I mean, if it was like a legit, I don't know what it was, but I felt like the doctors couldn't diagnose him, and maybe it wasn't like a real disease. It was just the stress of advocating, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so let's go to question. I think we're on 9. Okay, so were there any other profound thoughts or personal insights from the movie that are related to child and family advocacy?
Okay, so this is kind of a personal thought, but the scene where Wilbur decides to stop taking his medications and relies on strength from his pregnant wife, I think is a very powerful moment in child and family advocacy, because it shows that we need one another. Like, we can't do it alone. I think when I have a hard day, there are moments where I can't get through without a hug from my husband or a phone call or a Pepsi run or whatever it is. You know, we need each other, and that was really clear that he knew that he was weak and that he needed that strength. He asks his wife to tell him about their baby, and as they dream of the future together, he's able to bear his challenges. I think that the reason that signifies family advocacy is because families are a strength to us, and I don't think it's an accident. You know, I think Heavenly Father puts in families so we could be a strength to each other. Mm-hmm. Underlining thought throughout the movie is Peter Bill. I think this is important because it's always necessary for us to constantly adapt our focus, our charge, because the other side is always adapting. You know, technology is always changing, arguments are always changing, things are always changing. I think a perfect example is that same-sex marriage. You know, essentially on paper we've lost that fight, right? The Supreme Court's passed it. It's a done deal. We're moving forward, but at the same time, we get creative. We change our tactics. We continue to preach our message. Didn't change what we believe. It didn't change what we stood for. It just changed how we were able to tell people about that. And so I think that was the theme throughout the movie, is that we don't give up. We find a way, and someday, just as with Parliament did when a door was left open, for Wilbur to push through, Heavenly Father will do the same for us. We will find our way.
No, I agree with that. I would, yeah, I guess what I would just add is that it takes all your energy and your heart and your time, but you also need to balance it with your family. I think Wilbur really did, a decent job, and it helped that he had a supportive spouse. So that's important too, to find people that agree with you and can support you. Yeah, that's really what I talked about, is being persistent and patient and how long it takes, and finding people who agree and support you.
I talked a lot about that too. I talked a lot about his wife and how supportive she was, and just how I really liked that they touched on that and covered that so much and in detail. and just how good of a relationship he had with his wife. And then I also loved how they incorporated the religious and the policy and the government. Like, I thought it was just all really well balanced, and I really liked that. So, the next question is, what was your understanding of the doctrine of the family at the beginning of the semester, and how has it changed? So I think, is this mine?
Yes.
Okay. So my understanding at the beginning of the semester of doctrine and family and everything was kind of just based off of the smaller family unit, and how I hadn't really thought about outside of. I guess I didn't really think a lot about the Bonfenbrenner aspect of everything. I kind of just thought about mom, dad, and the kids, and that's kind of what I just thought about when it pertained to the doctrine of the family. But then as the semester went on, my ideas changed, and I really began to see how the family is affected by everything. I mean, your relationships, your friends, your teachers, your peers, your community, the government. I mean, I hadn't really thought in depth about how much of an effect those things have on your tiny little family that lives in your house, you know? And so I think that's where my idea totally changed. And as it changed, it made me want to become more of a family advocate and to be more educated and more involved in what's going on and like the policies and the different things that are affecting me and my family directly. And it made me want to educate those around me. And so I think that's where I changed a lot, and I thought this class was awesome. I mean, this is probably one of my favorite classes I've ever taken. So
yeah, I totally
yeah.
agree. I totally agree. I loved this class, and it really changed for me. And I don't know, I feel a little bit bad admitting this, but like I always like intellectually understood the doctrine of the family and the proclamation, and I was like, yeah, this is great, you know, yay family, right? But I didn't really, I don't feel like I really felt it as much as I do now. Going through this class it's really interesting because I've taken family foundations and like the religious family classes, which, you know, are great, but it honestly just kind of was the knowledge and the intellectualizing. And this one had me put it into practice and to really see it in like everyday life and to feel it. And so now I feel like I understand more about the importance and the responsibility and why it needs to be defended, and I feel more passionate about defending it. And I also, you know, something that really kind of surprised me is, you know, I'm a newlywed, but this class motivated me to be a better wife and to really prepare to be a mother, which honestly was not something I expected to come out of this class. I definitely had a lot more introspection about what I'm doing personally to strengthen my own family, and if I'm being a good enough wife, and I need to start thinking about being a mother and things like that, which was way different than what I was thinking about going into this class. So.
I kind of struggled on this one because I'll be honest, I didn't really learn anything that I didn't already know because I've taken all of the courses for the family. I mean, my major is marriage and family, so the doctrine of the family is like all we've studied. But some of my understanding of principles, I guess, changed. Like, you know, in the proclamation, I've read it 100 times and I understand what it says, and I know at the final it says that that we're really charged to take the message forward. You know, that we're being told that it is our duty to be an advocate. And I never really, I guess, ingrained that into that meant me too. I just kind of, that was having the proclamation, the work was being done. I didn't really say, oh, Brittany, you need to do this. And so that was something that kind of just clicked that, like, yeah, you do need to stand up for those things. I also learned that we don't have to be an expert on everything. I always thought that if we were going to be an advocate, that we had to go forward and we had to know it all. And I don't think the case. I think that we saw that in a lot of things, that there is room for error, and we can rely on other people to help us, but we start somewhere, and we can get the information along the way. But just because you're not an expert today doesn't mean that you can't stand for something. And then the other thing that I think was just really a reminder to me, and I think it's a good reminder to have all the time, is that our families are patterned after our Heavenly Father, and He gives us this purpose and direction for a reason. Like any testimony, feeding the seed of knowledge regularly has helped me find focus and peace in my own family, and it's strengthened me and given me kind of like an elastic band response to like challenges I'll face. So if I'm struggling with something, I kind of have that quick bounce back because of my family and the way that I know that the challenges we face as a family are for our greater good and eternal perspective. I found that if I pray and picture my family, like one of the examples that I've shared throughout the semester a couple times is that I have a special needs son, and when he gets really frustrating, which unfortunately is a lot, I found that if I picture him in white, like in a temple setting, that I have a different perspective on things, and I can put it into a different light and different perspective. And I think that just having that eternal picture is really something a reminder that kept coming to me through all semester. Every time we talked about something, it was like, why is family important? Why is family important? And this is more on a religious aspect and not like going forward and teaching the message to politics and the world today, but it was just something that's what I got out of it the most, was that my family, my immediate family, my 2 children, my husband are where I need to start my advocacy and then go from there.
Totally agree.
I like that you talked about how there's room for error, because that's something like that I kind of thought about too at the beginning of the semester, was if you're an advocate, you know it all. And I'm glad that you kind of brought that up, because after this semester I was like, oh wow, I really don't know a lot, and that's okay. There's still room to always learn, so I thought that was really good that you brought that up, so thanks.
Yeah, I also think something I got out of this class was how many resources are actually available. I guess I didn't realize how all of the stuff that you could access, and that UNICEF even existed, and all of these places, all of these things that happen. It's really amazing, and it makes me feel a lot more comfort that I'm not out there alone. Like, there are resources I can draw on who do know more than I do.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up too, because I had no idea that there were so many resources out there, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much out here, like there's so much support and so much for me to learn, so I'm glad that you brought that up too. Okay, so the last question is, picture your spouse and children, or current or future, and write down some thoughts about how they will benefit from your taking this class.
I think that's...
Is it me again? Is it me
or
again?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
I think my husband benefits from my taking the course because I've engaged in discussions throughout the entire semester, so he really has learned alongside. So he benefited just because I forced him to learn with me. I think it's a benefit to both of us because we've learned how important our individual family is and how we need to make it our first priority. I also think that one of the things we learned together was that one of the greatest services we can provide to our society is to live by example and raise our children to do the same. And I think enlisting my husband in the cause has been helpful because I don't feel like I'm doing it alone. I don't feel like I'm just trying to make our family better and hope that he notices. I'm able to engage him in that and say, hey, what if we did this? What have you thought about this, or whatever? I think it benefits my children because they learn from the beginning the importance, because I now know the importance. And I was never really taught to stand up for things or even how the best way to do that is. I really would rather hide in the shadows and not be out front. I'm not a missionary, and I'd really rather let other people do the work just because I'm nervous about that. But I've learned how to do it and why we should do it and why it works. And I think that the greatest gift I can give my children is to teach them early and teach them regularly. They know that they can make a change. Like, the example of the speeches that we watched with the younger children, I want my children to be able to have the confidence and the knowledge that they can do that, and I want them to know that their voice will matter, whether it's one voice or 100. So I think that's where they're going to benefit.
Totally agree.
I think one thing, I kind of said this earlier, but I think that one thing that'll benefit my kids and just my family in general from taking this class is that I'm a lot more educated on policy and things that are going on than I was before. Like, I really was not very informed on a lot of things that are going on in the UN and in our government and everything. Like, I just wasn't, I didn't know all the different things that were out there that really affect our family. And it makes me happy that I have the information that I do now and education that I do now and the resources, because now I'll be able to look at those things and go, oh, okay, so this is what's going on. And when there's something that comes out and we have to vote about it, I'll be able to actually know what's going on, and I now have I guess I kind of know how to look at the different resources that are available to me, and that I can make the right decision that's good for my family and that will help my children in the long run. So I think that's something that I kind of thought.
Yeah. For me, the biggest thing was I feel so much more prepared to be a mother. Honestly, I guess I was really kind of feeling afraid of parenting, but I feel like I understand what my role and what my role would be, and I take it a lot more seriously than I did before this class. I also feel like I understand the threats a little bit more too, and so I can be more vigilant in how to protect my family. And then I wrote I wrote a whole bunch of things, but I'm just gonna skip over. But overall, I just really feel like I appreciate my family so much more than I did before this class, and that I'm going to be a lot more vigilant in protecting it. So.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Like, I feel like I've learned a lot more on how to be a better mom.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I think the respect for the position of a family, like whether it's just your family as a whole, a mother, a wife, a sister, brother, whatever it is,
Yeah.
I think our individual roles as individuals is solidified in that. You know, we all have a play, and it's so important.
Yeah, definitely.
All
Okay,
right.
well, that's it. Those are all the questions. So I think we need to say our names at the end just to make sure. So I'm Elizabeth Bischoff.
Okay. I'm Leah Mon.
I'm Brittany Graff.
It was good to meet you guys, and I'm going to stop the broadcast.
All right.